Today on Shredding Spree, I'm calling a redo. More than a year ago, I posted a video about my one-up bike rack. Since then, the video's gotten a pretty decent amount of views for my channel, and it continues to get more views. But there's a problem with that. The video kinda sucked. Mostly just because the video was too long. But in the year and a half since I've been using this rack, my opinions have changed a little bit, and I felt it was necessary to revisit the topic. And this time, I'll skip all the theatrics so that those of you that just want to learn about the bike rack can get in, get your information, and get out. So this is the one-up Super Duty double bike rack. I'm running it with 2 add-on trays, which is the maximum number of add-ons for this system. I don't think you'd want to run another add-on anyway because this is already quite long off the back of the vehicle. In addition to the add-ons, I purchased the handle extension, which is a necessary addition when running this rack with a 4-bike setup, because the release lever is quite difficult to reach without it. The fully loaded rack with the add-on is also quite heavy and cumbersome, but the grab point of the handle makes it much easier to lower and lift it into its different positions. The hitch bar is slotted so you can adjust how deep you want to insert it into the receiver. I'll hold for giggles. The hitch bar is then held in place by an anti-wobble tensioner, which also takes the slack out of the receiver and keeps it from moving around too much while in transit. This is probably why it's considered off-road and RV rated when you consider this feature plus its robust construction. As mentioned, this rack has 4 positions. Does it have 4 positions? It has a vertical setting, diagonal setting, flat, and lowered. In any position, it is recommended that you twist down the knob, which ensures the black bar stays in place during transit. It has locking levers that can be opened to allow you to fold the trays up for storage to help save some space in the garage. But I never use these because the rack basically lives on my Jeep full time. This is called a tray style rack because the bikes sit in these trays while secured to the rack. This is one of the most ideal systems when transporting valuable bikes because the rack only clamps onto the tires, which prevents the damage that other style racks can cause to bike frames and components. Bikes are held onto the rack with these rack arms that are cinched in place by a sort of ratcheting lever setup. The spacer on the rack arms is adjustable, which accommodates wheel sizes ranging from 16 inches to 29 inches and up to a 3.1 inch width. Anything wider would require their spacer kit. The arms are released by pressing in on the rack arm and lifting the release lever. In consideration of security, you can lock the bikes onto the rack using a basic cable or chain lock, or utilize the extra holes in the rack arms with one of one-up's quarter-turn wheel locks. The add-ons are held in place by bolts that require a special wrench, which is nice, but they also offer a locking bolt which adds another layer of security. That's basically the quickest overview I can give you about the rack's operation. So in the year and a half that I've been using this rack, it's basically worked as advertised and I couldn't really be happier with it. But I did have to figure a few things out. So here we go. When I first got the rack, I initially couldn't stow the rack vertically on my Jeep because it wouldn't clear the spare tire. I was aware of hitch extenders, but was concerned the rack would bounce and wobble more with the added component. I eventually bit the bullet and went for one-up's hitch extender. To combat the wobble, one-up uses a lockable bolt-in pin design, which is pretty nice and secure, but it still had a lot of vertical movement, even when tightened. I tried stuffing washers and other things in the receiver to make a tighter fit, but eventually just picked up one of these hitch tensioners and it's eliminated the vertical movement. One of the greatest things about this rack is the absence of plastic parts. The entire rack is made of aluminum and steel, which eliminates the dry rot you get from softer materials like plastic. So while this rack is quite pricey, it should be the last one you ever have to buy. Even if a part fails or falls off, one-up has a complete inventory of replacement parts to get you back on the road. So as awesome as this rack is, I do have a few things that you need to watch out for if you commit to this setup. And it starts with the finish. I haven't had an issue with the coloring on my rack, but I have had friends with the black version where the anodizing has faded into an odd goldish black color. I also have another friend whose red release levers faded in 1 month to look as if they had spent years in the sun. I know anodizing will always fade over time, but that's pretty fast. And when you spend that kind of cheddar on something that's potentially living on your vehicle permanently, you probably want it to look nice for a little while. Next, that barrel thingy that secures the black bar in place needs to have a different shape that's easier to grip. I hardly ever engage this thing unless I'm doing a longer road trip. And when I do use it, it seems to tighten up to the point where I have to get mad at it to get it loose because it's in a place where I can only grip it with my fingertips. Oh, and watch out for your pedals. If you don't have the cranks positioned correctly, you could be driving down the highway while your wife's pedal is menacingly grinding the paint off of your son's bike. Sound oddly Pacific? Pacific? Yeah, that's oddly specific because it's happened to me twice. While you drive down the highway, the cranks can actually rotate themselves to a place where they start grinding away, which made me think that someone should come out with some sort of pedal guard to prevent this from happening altogether. But while I was typing the dialogue to this video, I made one quick Google search and there they were, right there on Amazon by Granite. Overpriced as they may be, it might just save you the same heartache I've experienced. Now, I've heard some people say that there's a little bit of a risk in a situation where you put the bike on the rack and the tire loses pressure while you're driving. This has never happened to me, so I tested it out, and it is actually pretty sketchy. I feel like it's more sketchy on bikes with smaller wheels, and it seemed to be less of a problem with bikes with larger wheels, but you still definitely wouldn't want to drive very far with air out of the tire. The tension from the rack arms does loosen up when the tire loses pressure, but if the other side's tight enough, it will hold it in place. Still, you wouldn't really want to drive far with that going on. And on smaller wheels with less of a tire protruding past the rack arm, it could be a bigger issue. My last piece of advice with this rack basically applies to anything you use with consistency. Check the bolts every now and then. Any bolt can loosen up over time and you don't want to leave anything on the road. So I hope this video makes up for the last one about this rack. If I left out any details or if you have any other questions, feel free to drop it in the comments and we'll continue the conversation there. Did I mention 1UP sells a bottle opener for it?